My presentation tonight is really a response to what was presented to me at our last gathering. I generally walk into this community space in the humble role of a volunteer provocateur. I ponder, study, research, and process some of the questions floating out there in the ether of our complicated world, and each month I try to raise a bit of a signal flare around those questions that might represent a new doorway or even a new excuse for you to ask those same questions for yourself. And maybe you can begin to uncomplicate your own world one question at a time. Last month, you might remember, the presentation was entitled, "Do You Have a Calling?" Just like many of our presentations, my starting point was that this question was indeed a pretty big question, and definitely worth more than an hour or so of provocation and discussion. What I didn't anticipate was that I involuntarily ended up guiding the question of our possible calling into a much bigger question than the already big question that I started with. I'll explain this involuntary guidance in a moment. But as a result of our remarkable conversation segment that followed, I was then struck by a particular inspiration that many of you, some of you who were here that night, shared. The inspiration, as I received it, was that the question of our personal calling might be better understood as a small question, rather than my big getting bigger version of the question. Now, I didn't mean small like unimportant, okay? But I meant small in the way that a seed is small compared to the tree that grows from it. Or small in the way that the whisper of a butterfly's wings is small compared to the roar of the tornado it is theoretically caused. Now, we've discussed this kind of butterfly and this kind of tornado before. Some of you might remember the story of Rosa Parks, whose quiet refusal to ride in the colored section of an Alabama bus inspired a generational civil rights leader named Martin Luther King Jr. Rosa is one of those butterflies that have captivated our imagination and sometimes have changed history by causing a tornado. What I learned about our calling. Now, those of you that were here last time, some of you might remember how I first brought the question of your calling to you. I illustrated this big question mainly with big stories of big calling. Malala Yousafzai, Winston Churchill, Amy Tan, David Issei, Steve Jobs. Now, if I had a plan for these stories, it was to illustrate what any of us might be capable of achieving if we discovered our personal calling and then followed it with passion. Without repeating any of these amazing stories of famous people who followed their personal calling, let's just say that I didn't get the textbook response from the community. I mean, these are impressive people, you'd have to agree, right? Some of them are even legendary. All of them are inspirational, I thought. But in the conversation time, many of you surprised me and then inspired me by engaging the question in the best tradition of the question community. You drilled down inside the legend to a deeper place. You drilled down to the personal place where this community always hopes it will go. So here's what I learned about your calling from you. Here's why I'm standing before you tonight with a fresh perspective on this important question. This time with a little help from Kyle, okay? You are not Malala. You are not Steve Jobs. You are authentic inhabitants of your own life. Now, James, who was here last week, is like a part-time photographer. And he made the point in the conversation that, look, man, sometimes you want to do things that you really want to do, but have to do the things you have to do in order to make a living. He says, I much prefer to be a photographer, but I need to pay my rent, right? I need to eat. I need to give myself an income so I have time to pursue some of the things that I want to do. Not always in the things that I want to do, but I have to earn money. And that's practical, okay? Another thing I learned, you aspire to make a difference in the habitat of your own life, whether you name it a calling or not. There were some guys here last week, or last month, who came to us through Meetup. Two of them actively attend different meetup groups that are concerned with spirituality and philosophy. They are involved in several. And the reason they do that is they're intentional about keeping their hearts and their minds open. So they're trying to make a difference. I don't know if they call it a calling, but they are actively trying to make a difference within the context of their own life by attending meetings just like the question, but all kinds of meetings. You are genuinely provoked by the question of a calling. Is it what you do or is it who you are? Now, there was a person that came up to me afterwards who actually said to me, look, I've been listening to everybody talk about what they think is a calling, what they don't think is a calling, but I want you to know that I'm actually now thinking about what I'm doing with my life. I won't say who it was, but it was that was inspiring to me. You know, that one person said, no, okay, I get it. I am thinking a little bit about what I'm doing and about why I'm restless. That was inspiring. You are aware of how you express who you are in whatever you are doing, whether you call or whether you're officially acknowledging your calling in life or not. Now, my friend Barry was here last month, and Barry made a really powerful statement about the fact that he's not sure about what his calling is, or that if there's an official calling in his life, but he has learned that there's something significant in the power and powerful in acts of small, simple intention. And that every day at work or when he's with other groups or when he's with his family, with his friends, there's power in these small, simple acts of being intentional. Is that a calling? I don't know. But Barry was really strong in the fact that he practices this every day. You operate from your real life, or you operate your real life from a deeper place, a personal center that guides and colors whatever you do. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's dramatic. I called out Curtis last month. Curtis is, he's not here to defend himself, so I'll talk about him. Curtis is a talented and original songwriter. He's just got a unique way of writing a song and delivering a song. But he's also involved in a pretty active career in real estate. It's a real career, which he really enjoys. I kind of called him on it in a friendly way last week. I said, how do you reconcile those two things? You know, I know you to be a great songwriter. You should be doing more songwriting. Why aren't you? Kind of. Straight-faced, he looked at me and said, you know, I get what you're trying to say. He said, but I'd like to think that whatever it is you think that's unique about me, that I inject that into my management job in the same way that I inject it into my songwriting. I was kind of floored by that. I was floored by the truth of that, okay? That what Curtis was saying, that somewhere at his center, whether he's writing a song or he's trying to rent out a group of apartments, okay, he's using some of the same gifts that are and the same inspiration that are at his center. I thought that was really, really interesting and really inspiring. Okay, so that is what I learned about your calling from you. I learned that for many of you, the question of your calling is not really a big question. To my previous point, it's actually a small question. An origin question, if you like a seed or a butterfly can be the origin of something monumental. Now, in one of the few overtly religious references I sometimes utilize, not because it's religious, but because it fits, I'll paraphrase Jesus' take on this question of origin. He basically said that the smallest mustard seed of inspiration at the center of a single person can grow into an enormous tree, even a movement that can affect the lives of many. Now, last month I learned that some of you are already aware of your own small seed right now. Some of you may even be experiencing the growth, but don't really understand why. Either way, our conversation last month made me thankful for this community and inspired me to ask you this question tonight. What lies beneath? I'll begin with Mark Twain's famous quote, which I shared last month to prompt our question. He said, the two most important days in your life are the day you are born and the day you find out why. Now, I thought that this was his creative way of saying that the important personal what of our lives will flow from some kind of an encounter, a deeper understanding of the important personal why in our lives. I concluded last month that he was trying to say that the possibility of understanding why we are here is connected to the possibility of understanding if we have a calling. But like I said, many of you responded to this famous insight from a famous person from out of the day-to-day practical truths of your own lives. You respectfully argued that perhaps Mark Twain wasn't so much talking about your personal calling, but was simply pointing us to the importance of the question, why are we here? Called or not? Put another way, I walked away from conversation last month with a new appreciation of the basic importance of discovering our personal why. And by contrast, how unimportant is our actual choice of expression or eventual calling, because that choice is so completely personal. Mark Twain's comment might make the most sense when we think of it this way: whether you're famous or, like most of us, anonymous, or whether you change the world or just change yourself. And now think, Mark Twain was trying to communicate the importance of the seed and not the tree. He knew that only some of us might become tornadoes, but all of us can become butterflies. Ralph Waldo Emerson, he's a famous American essayist and poet, was a slightly older contemporary of Mark Twain. Both men were raised in a classic American religious environment, but both men struggled with, challenged, and often articulated the contradiction that they sensed inside a religious world they could not embrace. Just like Twain's quote about the question of why, one of Emerson's most famous quotes is a provocation about the question of within, or for our purposes tonight, beneath. What lies behind us and what lies before us are small matters compared to what lies within us. And when we bring what is within us out into the world, miracles happen. So taken together, Mark Twain and Emerson don't seem to be pointing us to the practical, visible expression of the tree, okay, which is our calling, but to the possible, invisible presence of the seed, which for the rest of the evening I'll call identity. In my own completely inadequate way, I want to join with them tonight by sharing this possibility with all of you. The possibility that a mystery worth exploring might actually lie beneath. Now, the term identity has become an easy term in our world, almost like wallpaper. Now, I mean actual wallpaper, okay, not the digital kind. It's the kind of wallpaper that sort of fits into the decor of any room by being colorful and engaging, but also kind of common and familiar. Last year, I presented a question about the meaning of the word love, in which I asked whether or not the word love has become like that wallpaper to us, with so many easy applications and usages that it has ceased to have meaning. I asked if the word love had lost its power and become almost a throwaway term that has dried up from overuse and even abuse. And even though I'm raising the possibility that both Mark Twain and Ralph Emerson were speaking about the importance of our personal identity, I'm completely aware that when each of you actually hear me say identity, which is a term that is also kind of overextensively used, you may have thought that I was just another wallpaper hanger. These are all the different iterations of identity, at least some of them. But perhaps by sharing a bit about what we think identity is or is not, we'll find a way beyond the wallpaper to the possibilities that Twain and Emerson were really talking about. Now, the most obvious and often the easiest way to launch a question is to share the textbook version of that question, or the textbook view, I should say. Here's a composite version of the dictionary definition of identity, taken from several different sources. Now, according to the dictionary, identity is the fact of being who or what a person or thing is. Identity is the characteristics determining who or what a person or thing is. Identity is who a person is, or the qualities of a person or group that makes them different from others. Identity is the sameness of essential character in different instances and in all that constitutes the objective reality of a thing. This is a really interesting one from mathematics, okay? Identity in mathematics is a transformation or a variable form that still leaves the object unchanged. Identity is a separate or a distinct existence. Identity is the condition of being oneself or itself and not another. Identity is the state of having unique identifying characteristics held by no other person or thing. Okay, so without trying to impart any philosophical, scientific, or spiritual spin on the dictionary meaning of identity, allow me to just condense these different conditions into a slightly more organized form. I organize this one myself. Identity is distinct existence or essence held by no other person, which regardless of transformation or variable forms remains unchanged. Identity is the condition of being oneself and not another. Identity is a fact that determines who a person is. Now, even the dictionary definition, the cold dictionary definition, is saying that identity is your fact, your essence, your distinctive personhood that doesn't change even when change seems all around you or even inside of you. I'm not trying to impose this definition on you, as you'll see in the next few moments. Like everything in this community, I'm just asking you to ask yourself, have you ever thought of your identity this way? Now, if you haven't, let me share a bit about why we often find ourselves just staring at the wallpaper of our identity, thinking that it's actually us. Now, our modern view of identity is kind of pasted on us, just like wallpaper. In a relentless effort to understand ourselves by categorizing ourselves, that's a whole other presentation, by the way, we have expanded and perhaps watered down our concept of identity through the use of prefix descriptions. Now, here's some of those prefixes: gender identity, ethnic identity, religious identity, cultural identity, digital identity, plus a whole host of other sub-identities, too many to mention. Now, I'm not here to argue that the prefixes aren't accurate or even sometimes useful in our genuine attempt to increase the understanding of ourselves and those around us. Besides, whether accurate or not, the prefix approach to identity has become wildly popular in our world. Public expressions of this kind of identity of our identity are occurring more frequently and with more intensity than ever before. To continue with the wallpaper metaphor, I'd argue that our prefix approach to identity has actually become the most powerful kind of wallpaper. Powerful enough that the prefixes themselves are becoming the practical modern version of identity. And in the process, these many prefixes are actually covering the reality of our original identity, just like any wallpaper can cover the reality of the original wall underneath. Now, to help you out, here's a quick prefix identity exercise to help you better frame the question. Okay? My physical identity, okay, is Frederick Tamagi. My gender identity is male. My ethnic identity is Japanese. My cultural identity is Canadian, mostly. My religious identity is whatever it is. My sexual identity is whatever it is. My digital identity is, it says none of your business. My other sub-identities are businessman, songwriter, father, etc. Therefore, my identity is what? Now, many of you have already concluded the easiest path through this exercise is to just say that our identity is simply a composite of all of the above. That makes sense, right? That in fact, we are the wallpaper. Our very own special wallpaper, individual wallpaper, but wallpaper nonetheless. And that seems so sensible, doesn't it? If our prefixes are all true, as far as we know, and as far as I know, those are all true. But does something else lie beneath Okay? Is there an original wall upon which our prefixes are pasted like wallpaper? And is that wallpaper merely expressing our visible identity to a visible world? Is our physical image, our gender, our ethnicity, or our cultural, religious, or sexual practices merely layers of identification that from the moment we were born began to cover over a fundamental, original identity that is completely distinctive, completely unique in and of itself? Could it be that our original identity is our consciousness of ourselves before we were conscious of anyone or anything else? Before we were conscious of any of the prefixes? Before the wallpaper? Now, in this metaphor, our prefixes are how we manifest to the world. Our consciousness is how we manifest to ourselves. I know that the word manifest has the reputation of being one of those $100 religious words used to describe some kind of miraculous materialization. But in reality, manifest actually just means to make clear or evident. So in this case, I'm going to use a less expensive, non-religious version of manifest to raise this question about what possibly lies beneath our wallpaper expressions of identity. Manifest. Now, all of us were babies once, okay? And most of us have observed and interacted with babies, sometimes from the moment of birth. Babies of any species are the simplest, best examples of identity that exist. In my own experience as a father, babies are living provocations for the question that our consciousness is actually our original true identity. And this is for you, Randy. Before you jump to any conclusions about where I'm going with this will not be a canned presentation about unlocking your inner child. Please hold on to the idea that this question is all about the possible pure truth of your identity right now. Okay? Right now and in the future. Have you ever looked at yourself in the mirror and wrestled with this idea? Have you ever considered that the image you were looking at was being observed from the inside of a unique consciousness that was just somehow connected to the physical form in the mirror? That an invisible conscious version of you was merely observing this visible structural version of you in the mirror. Now, this kind of unique consciousness is sometimes described as being like gazing outward through the windows of a house at a physical image that just happens to be you. And I don't know if you've ever had that sensation. I get that sometimes. That I'm just looking out through the windows of some kind of a structure or a house that's something else on the outside. That image in the mirror is the version of you that carries many of the prefixes we attach to identity. Okay? Physical, gender, ethnic, cultural, even religious prefixes are in the mirror, just to name a few of those possibilities. Let me express this possibility again by again using the original metaphor for the evening. Our consciousness of ourselves is like the wall observing the wallpaper from the inside. Our consciousness of ourselves is like the wall observing the wallpaper from the inside. Now, by contrast, baby's identity has no prefixes. Baby doesn't know or care about the multiple kinds of identity the world will eventually attach. Baby doesn't really know its gender, ethnicity, cultural or religious persuasion, or any other prefix really. A baby's consciousness is only concerned about expressing its own established, already present identity. Baby doesn't know that other identities will be required or even forced upon it later on in life. A baby's consciousness is the purest form of identity without prefixes. So when a baby looks in the mirror, there is no wallpaper. How a baby manifests to itself and then to the world are exactly the same. For a baby, consciousness is identity. Now, we were all babies once, and we all started out the same way before we were prefixed to death. We were already present, okay, born with a consciousness, with an identity that is purely ours. Next time you look in the mirror, ask yourself a new question. If I can look outward from my consciousness at the image of my body, can I look inward from my consciousness at the image of my identity? Just so you don't think that all this baby identity stuff is like my version of distracting you with puppy pictures. Allow me to share some purely adult declarations of this kind of unique consciousness. All of them are actually about the pure identity of a child, a pure identity that still may lie beneath all of our advanced adult prefixes. First one's from Jesus. Truly I tell you, he said, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. It's an ancient indigenous proverb. Treat the earth well. It was not given to you by your parents. It was loaned to you by your children. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. Chinese proverb. Do not confine your children to your own learning, for they were born in another time. Picasso. Every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once we grow up. Socrates. An honest man is always a child. Huxley. The secret of genius is to carry the spirit of the child into old age. Here's another reason why the question of what lies beneath might be important for you to consider. There is another troubling and darker consequence of the wallpaper that we have pasted to the original wall of identity. Sean referred to it, and we talked about it in the discussion. Is anyone else here troubled by the tendency of our adult expressions of identity to ignite division and intolerance of one another rather than understanding and respect for one another? Identity-based claims and grievances are fueling an unprecedented wave of disconnection, conflict, violence, and suffering all over the world. I know that pushes back a little against the statistics in your book. Religious-based terrorism, ethnic conflict, gender discrimination, cultural discontent, and wealth inequality are all manifestations of our prefixes, all committed in the name of identity. Now, under the cover of this kind of identity, any group can call themselves unique, superior, even noble, while condemning others who are not like them. We are haunted by examples in history where identity politics can gradually transform democracy into dictatorship, where identity is either a weapon or a weakness. Okay, I feel the need to go back to my baby metaphor. It will help illustrate why this identity-based conflict, however noble or righteous its champions believe it to be, might actually be a corrupt barrier that prevents us from looking inward and discovering what lies beneath. It's a nice contrast from Nazis. Observe any multiracial, multicultural gathering of babies, toddlers, even small children interacting together in a closed environment. Dare I say it? Okay. They don't care if their identity is the same or different than the others around them. Each child's consciousness is observing and coexisting simultaneously with every other child's consciousness. This self-consciousness is completely unique and present in each child. It doesn't require any other child to adopt or share the same consciousness of things. Remember that I said previously that for a baby, consciousness is identity. For that reason, even though each child is uniquely self-conscious, there is also a kind of present unity or oneness, even that doesn't artificially segregate one child from another. It suggests that if consciousness is identity, then uniqueness inspires unity. Uniqueness inspires unity. Now, this is kind of counterintuitive, right? But it emanates from what lies beneath. By contrast, the prefix-laced identity of adults often obscures and corrupts this incredible original consciousness. Our adult version of identity appears to provoke conflict and intolerance instead. Uniqueness now breeds disunity. If we're different, we can't be together. Now, these children will gradually grow into adulthood and possible disconnection, and many will lose sight of what lies beneath. The adult consciousness, observing adult images in the mirror of our world, defaults to looking outward, and so becomes the image. Now, is this loss of inward sight inevitable for us? Do we have to lose touch with our original, truest identity? I confess that I don't have any easy answers to those questions, because they're the ones that don't get answered until much further down the road. And even if I thought I had the answers, I wouldn't presume, just like last month, I wouldn't presume that they would be your answers. My main goal tonight is to provoke you to ask yourself the first question, the question that may start you on the road in the first place. What lies beneath? Now, it's also quite possible that some of you just don't buy it. You don't buy the idea of some kind of original present identity that was there from the moment you took your first breath. You're skeptical about an alleged pure consciousness of yourself that isn't just the outer manifestation of who you become, but is an inner manifestation of who you actually are. So if you can't, in good conscience, consider the possibility of what lies beneath, then it's perfectly okay to see your identity however it manifests as you interact with the world around you. This kind of practical identity should be both accepted and respected. There need be no expectation beyond this for you if you choose not to ask the question. On the other hand, I've shared some simple illustrations of a more intentional self-consciousness practice, like looking inwardly just as you would outwardly to a mirror, or re-originalizing an identity from your childhood. If these illustrations have provoked you or even have reminded you of a self-consciousness that you're already aware of, then what's to lose in asking the question, what lies beneath? Aristotle said, it's the mark of an educated man, or educated mind, to entertain a thought without having to accept it. The question tonight is just that. It's an invitation to entertain a thought and to be intentional about looking inward, just for the possibility of your identity. You might now feel that even the dictionary definition of identity carries a new significance for you, so it merits another quick look. In this new context, identity is distinct existence or essence held by no other person, which, regardless of transformation or variable forms, remains unchanged. Identity is the condition of being oneself and not another. Identity is a fact that determines who a person is. Now, no one is trying to tell you to believe that you have this kind of identity, okay? Or what to think about it, or even what to call it. You could call it essence, distinctiveness, consciousness, oneness, self, soul, spirit. And whether you think true identity is religious, spiritual, intellectual, philosophical, or even simply neurological, I invite you to listen to the diverse voices of wisdom. All of them suggest that identity is truth, that your identity is your truth. But these voices say to find it or rediscover it, you must look inward. It's not present anywhere else. Marcus Aurelius. Look inward. Don't let the true nature of anything elude you. George Eliot. It's never too late to be what you might have been. Socrates. Beloved Pan and all ye other gods who haunt this place, give me beauty in the inward soul, and may the outward and the inner man be one. Aristotle. Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Rumi. The universe is not outside of you. Look inside yourself. Everything that you want, you already are. Carl Jung. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. Steve Jobs. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and your intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary. Terence McKenna. We've been to the moon, we've charted the depths of the ocean and the heart of the atom, but we have a fear of looking inward to ourselves because we sense that is where all the contradictions flow together. Now, I kind of favor Terence McKenna's take on the challenge of looking inward for our true identity, partially because we're so conditioned to the outward markers and measurements that seek to tell us who we are. He's saying that to disengage from our outward-facing vision and then turn that vision inward can indeed be a fearful experience. Anyone who has faced even a partial truth about themselves can probably attest to this. I know I can. But I mostly favor his take because the question of what lies beneath can only be asked if one embraces the contradiction of true identity. That the wallpaper is not the wall. Now, I'm going to close with a re-originalization story of my very own. I hesitated to do this, but decided to. On the wall of my bedroom, I have a framed array of black and white baby pictures of me, taken when I was perhaps like a year old. Okay? When I look at these pictures, it's like looking at myself in the mirror, except, as the Chinese proverb said, I was born in another time. When I look into the eyes of that baby, who I know was me, my consciousness will often feel like it's looking back at me. I find myself processing that the baby in the picture is me, both past and present. Now, I can only speak for myself, of course, but the child gazing back at me often stirs me to be more conscious of myself, more present in myself, and more fearless to be myself, as he is. He's a reminder to me that under all of my prefixes, something completely original does in fact lie beneath. Now, if you have a favorite childhood picture, you might wish to experiment with it. And instead of just looking at the picture, from your consciousness of yourself, allow the picture to look back at you. Or try looking in the mirror with an intention different from just examining your outward image. Use the mirror to become aware of your consciousness observing your image, like gazing through that window to the outside world. And then, instead of just looking outward like you always have, from your consciousness of yourself, try to look inward. Now, I realize that what I've just suggested could be easily dismissed, okay, as two prime examples of my own weird but creative imagination, or even something slightly more strange than imagination. But it's worth it to me, if you think it's worth it to you, to develop your own strange intention to look inward for what lies beneath. Like I said, whatever you wish to call it, consciousness, essence, distinctiveness, self, soul, spirit, What lies beneath could be your identity. What lies beneath could be your truth. Will you look for it? That's it. Thanks for being so patient.